He's been kind of quiet. We'll see how long that lasts.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Former Supreme Court Justice Bob Flanders is a candidate for the United States Senate, and there was a certain degree of hoopla that surrounded his announcement months ago, but he's been pretty quiet. I don't know what the stealth operation is all about, whether it's just a whole bunch of fundraising success behind the scenes or whether he's just rope-a-doping, pacing himself, but I think it's time he gets into this race, especially when Link Chafee is chatting up the room. Not that he has to most likely run against Link Chafee. Chafee's going to run as a Democrat against Sheldon Whitehouse. Bob Notarlillo, the state representative, is the other Republican in this Senate race. But blue chip, as I believe he is, it's time to get in gear. So that'll be a message from my guest, as if he needs my unsolicited advice. But generally, I get his on all sorts of things, legal issues and like. I'll try to tap into that mind this evening. Great to have you aboard. Thanks very much for tuning in. On the political scene, here's some new numbers. Well, here's a headline. The governor is just so far out ahead of her competition in terms of fundraising, but that should not be a surprise. The $4+ million number will probably rise to at least $5 million. But Matt Brown, the former Secretary of State and now Democrat in the race, will most likely dent that treasury significantly. If you remember, Gina Raimondo spent so much money in the last primary that she was like zeroed out for the general election. I don't think that's going to happen, but she's going to need a lot of those resources. Can you put lipstick on a campaign that's stuck at 42%? We'll find out. $4 million will certainly tell the story on that, right? We'll talk about that more as we go along. But here's the list of everybody else in their money, and it's not big. Alan Fung right now is at $300,000. You know, Rep. Morgan, the minority leader in the Republican Party, at $185,000. Joe Trillo says, "Sorry, I don't need your money. It's only my money. That's it." This guy Bob Gilbert is who? He's got $100,000. He's the moderate party guy. We're going to have to get him in here soon. Brown's not showing any dough, and the interesting nut there is Giovanni Ferrosi at $500. He is playing rope-a-dope with the campaign reporting process on purpose. I don't know. I don't think he's got millions to put into this thing. Some people say he doesn't have a pot do you know what in, but he's kind of playing with that whole thing. So we'll see as we go. And of course, you see the whole mosaic of all the gubernatorial candidates. It is a full field. I almost know all their names. All right, let's move along here. This real quick, CNN headline. Are you surprised that reportedly the chief of staff called the president an idiot? Here's CBS's summary.
There is a report out tonight that the president's chief of staff, John Kelly, called the president an idiot behind his back. What is the White House saying about that?
Well, not surprisingly, the chief of staff denied that charge and denied it forcefully, calling it, quote, total BS. Now, Kelly has alienated some in the West Wing by giving more power to cabinet secretaries, and he has struggled to keep a tight rein on the president's schedule and access to the president. Mr. Trump has at times resented that move by the chief of staff. And in the end, there have been many rumors about Kelly's imminent departure, but he's still here, and that's kind of a reality of the Trump White House.
What did you think he was going to do? Say, yeah, I called him an idiot? It's just the former Secretary of State never denied that he called the president a moron. I would think that it's pretty frustrating for these guys when they're getting into the nuances of international policy, diplomacy, negotiation, North Korean strategy, all of that. I am guessing that there are days when they just bang their head against the wall and mumble something. So whether he calls BS on it or not is almost immaterial. Let's come home. I'm going to get Judge Flanders' thought on this real quick. I think this is a fascinating conversation. Judge Nettie Vogel, after a terrible murder trial the other day, suggested that nobody, including reporters, ought to contact jurors after the verdict. I don't know, in fact, she called them my jurors. And I understand the intimacy a judge sometimes feels with a jury because he feels like they have to protect them in sort of a way, but I'm not sure that she hasn't gone too far, and the Journal and other media outlets are litigating now on this particular matter. Anytime I got a dangling legal question, I used to call Bob Flanders and anything on the radio just to get a take. Good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you.
You have a thought on this before we get into the Senate race?
Yeah, I think that, as you noted, judges are very protective of their jurors and don't want them to be harassed by the media or by anybody else. So it's not uncommon for judges to instruct jurors that they don't have to talk to anybody if they don't want to. It's up to them. But to actually order third parties not to interview may go a step too far here, because this is a form of prior restraint, which under the First Amendment is something that the government is not really allowed to do. So I think this is going to be an interesting challenge to that rule. Again, understandable to protect jurors and give them the right to not to be interviewed if they don't want to, but to actually order the media and others not to interview them?
Yeah, I understand her sentiment. This is a murder trial. You know, that violence is integral in that particular case. Jurors should be able to, you know, levy a guilty plea as they did in this particular case, without fear of, you know, walking out in the parking lot afterwards. Absolutely. And somebody taking it out on them. And so I think that's probably what her sentiment is, but you know, maybe the courts have got to do a little bit of a job of actually helping to protect and secure jurors for a period of time after a trial. But to suggest that they can't be spoken to is you know, and what's the length of time for that? I mean, how long does that stretch out, right?
Exactly. I mean, it might be permissible, for example, to have a very limited period where you don't talk to them, but to have a forever ban on interviewing these folks seems to be a bit much.
All right, so that'll close what has been our formal role with Judge Flanders to get a little bit of legal advice on things that are happening in the contemporary news cycle. Is it unfair for me to ask the question, where the hell have you been in this race?
Dan, you must not be reading social media, Twitter and
Facebook. Because I'm sure you're a social media maven now.
Well, I've become one, believe it or not. You have to be.
Right?
You have to be these days. And I've been doing interviews and speaking all over Rhode Island. So, you know, everybody wants to see you all the time. And you know, if you're in Woonsocket, you're not in Newport. So I think I've been out there, but, you know, as you know, this is heating up. I'm doing more and more, and that's going to continue.
So is it a question of the kind of, and maybe I'm just focused on and maybe you're making a point that I need to listen to carefully, and that is, sometimes we get stuck into what is the candidate doing on the mainstream media level, you know, local mainstream media. You know, how much news are you generating? You know, how many press conferences are you calling? You know, what press releases are out there on key issues? You did have an interesting essay in the Journal, I believe, a week or two ago that I think was interesting, and we'll talk about that. But there is a need to develop a candidacy on the ground.
Correct.
And that's what you're doing? You're working out there every day?
Absolutely.
Talking to the peoples?
Talking to people, fundraising, meeting with Republican groups whose endorsement I need in order to get the nomination. So yes, all of the above, and plus writing pieces like the one you just alluded to and posting on social media. So I'm doing all of that.
How's that, you know, that fundraising thing is such a pain in the neck. I mean, what was your target and where are you in terms of that target?
Well, right now we've got over $400,000 in the bank, which pales in comparison to the incumbent. But I don't need to raise the most money. I just need to raise enough to get onto television, hopefully by late July, which I think I'll be able to do. We just released, actually today, a radio piece on my paid ad on my campaign. Some of the themes that I'll be stressing, that'll start to run. So you'll start to see more and more of me get rolled out as we get into the campaign. It's still only April, and this is a long haul, as you know. Got a primary in September, and then immediately, if I prevail there, pivot to the general election in November.
All right, well, we'll talk about Link Chafee's entry into this contest, if that has an impact, and we'll actually talk a couple of issues, if that's okay with you. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Just a couple of days ago, Link Chafee was in here with, I will tell you, and I say this, well, I'm not going to mince words, but it's probably the most lucid conversation I've had with Link Chafee on the issues in a long time, because he can kind of get away from you from time to time. I'm sure you know the former senator, governor, mayor. What else has Link done?
Yeah, no, Link Chafee and I go back a ways.
You're not plotting with him, are you? There's no collusion here to run in the Democratic primary?
I was surprised, as everyone else was, when he made his announcement. But when he was a senator, he recommended me for elevation to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. It didn't happen because he and President Bush didn't get along very well. But then he, of course, when he became governor, he asked me to step into the Central Falls situation and straighten out that mess. So I've worked with Lincoln Chafee over the years, and know he and his family, so yes, we do know each other.
To his credit, and I pointed it out, he had 4 points that bothered him about Sheldon Whitehouse, and they weren't personal, they were issues, professional, and I think he'll probably carry that kind of game to Sheldon Whitehouse. Were you pleased just strategically to see that the incumbent's going to have to spend a little dough and pay a little attention to the Democratic
Absolutely.
primary?
I welcome Senator Chafee or Governor Chafee into the race. I think he'll raise interesting issues that Senator Whitehouse will have to address, and most importantly, it will cause him not to sit back on his haunches while we have a primary on the other side. Right. He'll have to spend some money and take that candidacy seriously. So I welcome it.
In your first attempt at election here, and certainly biting off a very, very big project here with the Senate. Well, this is not your first. Back in the day, it's a great story you tell. We told it the last time.
Yeah.
You ran for what again?
I was a 2-term councilman in Barrington.
That's right.
Where I was living at the time.
Right, and kind of messed the district up a little bit or something like that. It's an old story.
I won on the East Providence vote.
Right, there you go. He's out canvassing so hard, he's in the wrong side of town, asking for a guy's vote. He said, "You got it, but you got a problem, pal. You're in the wrong town."
But I wish he said, "I got it." He said, "You'll never get my vote."
Oh, that's right. Okay, but anyway, the story was told at the announcement. It was very, very, very funny. But given that you've been out of that game, you certainly have watched government peripherally. What have you learned so far in the first few months about being out on the road and talking about a major candidacy? What has surprised you?
Well, I think what I've learned is that people want a senator, in particular, that's the race I'm running for, who cares about the average Rhode Islander and their problems. And they're not as much interested in somebody pontificating about climate change and things like that. That's not to say that's not important, but that there are more issues that Rhode Islanders want to hear about: jobs, the economy, health care, immigration, all of the hot button issues that are important to many people here. And so there's some frustration, and there's also frustration with the hyper-partisanship that we're seeing down there, where these two parties can't seem to work together to come to solutions on some of these issues that are absolutely crying out for some compromises in order to get them done. So I think there's great dissatisfaction with the system as it now exists, and they want some new blood down there. And I'm doing this for one reason, not to create a political career. I want to give back to this state that's been so good to me and my family, and it deserves better representation.
Do you find yourself asking about the partisanship, or is it involuntarily coming out?
Both. I mean, I get it without asking for it, but I also talk about it and get positive feedback.
The Republican Party that you're running under and with is as guilty with its titular head, the President of the United States, on divide and conquer as I've seen it in my lifetime.
No question about it. This is not a one party is at fault issue. Both parties have been too partisan, in my opinion, and not working together enough. And unfortunately, the president, on occasion, more often than not, perhaps, exacerbates that problem.
You're finding a lot of black and white disposition. I'm talking about, traditional. You see things black and white. Not a lot of nuance and not a lot of middle ground out there.
There are a lot of single issue people that are here that they feel ultra strongly about one issue, and perhaps, if not to the exclusion, at least more than any other. So that's what they want to hear from you on.
We've been, at times, based on the news cycle in Parkland, of course, the last major tragedy, hyper-focused on the gun issue. You wrote an op-ed piece, we've got a headline here, regarding the shooting and gun issues in general. Synopsis for me.
The synopsis is that we ought to focus first and foremost on school security. We're going to battle about gun control issues for the foreseeable future. But in the meantime, our kids, our teachers, our administrators in some of these schools are sitting ducks for these maniacal killers that come in and blow away 15, 20 people before the police can arrive 15 minutes later. We got to have better security on board, including armed guards where necessary. You can't go to a ball game where you announce at URI without armed security. You can't go to an airport. You can't go to an office building. But our kids are sitting there at the mercy of these killers, and we got to have better protection.
So how do we fund that? Because most people say, yeah, but, and I've been preaching that speech since Newtown. I still can't believe that I don't know if we're going to define it as our most precious cargo, but we certainly feel that way. Our little ones, our grammar school kids, are unsecured with weapons, meaning officers, resource officers, but our middle and high school students are here in Rhode Island. And, everyone says, oh, too much money. Is it too much money? Is it a need for federal dough? I mean, you're going to make a step down in Washington to be able to channel that, dedicated revenue streams? I mean, what's the solution to that?
Well, the first point is that, as you just pointed out, what's the most precious asset we have is our kids. All right, so we've got to allocate some money somehow to protect them. Otherwise, they're just at the mercy of these folks. But secondly, I think we could tap into, on a voluntary basis even, retired military, retired police officers, and I think the community at the local level would step up. These people have training and could use some more, and the federal government ought to allocate some of its education dollars towards retraining of some of these folks so that they can come back.
On a payroll or volunteer or what?
Both. I mean, hopefully, I think a lot of people would volunteer if given the chance.
I think it's just hard to keep a sustained program up when it comes to a volunteer
That may be,
basis.
but what's even harder is keeping these folks defenseless and having more of these occur and say, geez, what can we do? There are things we can do. It's called increased security at our schools. And, frankly, even if we were to issue an edict tomorrow that banned all automatic and semi-automatic weapons, the 8 to 13 million of them that are out there would still be in the hands of some of these killers. And so that's not a complete solution. You've got to focus on school security.
All right, we'll come back. A couple other issues. The incumbent, how do you tackle them next? Sheldon Whitehouse, the U.S. Senator. It's interesting. Sheldon has kind of this lower than perhaps expected for a long time incumbent popularity rating, but he's most likely, according to the pundits, solid as a rock in terms of at least the Democratic and perhaps a touch of the independent constituency out there. Have you been thinking about how you rattle that cage?
Well, I think...
And what he stands for, that you're able to do some product differentiation on?
Yeah, I think that most people here would maybe associate him with environment or climate change. And as I suggested earlier, I think what I'm hearing is that's not enough. We need to hear more from you. We need to have you do more to help Rhode Island out.
Like what? What do people demand from their senators? Money, bacon. They think Reed's got that pretty much taken care of, right?
But we have two senators, just like Texas and New York, and it's not enough that one is pulling their weight. We need both pistons firing at full charge all the time.
Well, he's a Democratic pit bull. That's one of his roles down there.
Well, he's considered, I think, one of the most partisan senators down there. He is the attack dog against the Republicans, and so what I'm hearing is what I said earlier, that they want somebody who's going to be more cooperative and work with the other side to get solutions on immigration, on health care, on infrastructure. We got the worst roads and bridges in the country, and we would stand to benefit here in Rhode Island from an infrastructure program. Yet, you know, we don't seem to be making any headway on that because, among other things, we need to have cooperation from both sides.
Well, we have a roadworks program that was buoyed by some serious federal money that Jack Reed helped to bring in. Of course, we have a toll solution that I think will never be fully implemented,
right,
either by litigation prevention or just the political will of the people. Finally waking up to the notion that if the thing doesn't carve out the right pro forma, we're all going to get hit. Nobody wants to be tagged driving around Route 146 with their car for tolls over a bridge that they didn't know they crossed, right?
Right.
So, but I wonder what the federal solution is. I see a real bifurcation, though, in terms of local solutions here in Rhode Island between federal representation and state representation. Do you? It's like a disconnect in a lot of ways.
Well,
that's not our issue. That, you know,
no,
that's not our issue.
No, I agree. I think we need more cooperation. And one of the problems we have, Dan, is that with a monolithically Democratic delegation down there, with an all-Republican-controlled Congress, an all-Republican-controlled executive branch, and an all-Republican-controlled presidency, we don't have a seat at the policy-making table. Wouldn't it be good, and hasn't it served Rhode Island in the past? Think of John Chafee, to have at least one guy wearing the same jersey as the team that's on the field. And I think we could do a lot more with that. Advocate for our small businesses, like fishing, like the defense industry. Yeah, Jack Reed does his thing, but as I said, we need two senators that can really go to bat for Rhode Island.
Reportedly, there's an anti-establishment feeling amongst the constituency. You worried about that? Because, your whole persona is, and I say this respectfully, judge, successful lawyer, your whole look. I mean, you look establishment. So do you worry that you get caught up in kind of you don't fit the bill type of thing?
Well, I'm running as an outsider. I'm not a career politician. That's the point. I'm somebody who's done a lot of public service, but always from the private sector. I'm a guy who had his own private law firm, so I know what it's like to meet a payroll. I come from a background of, I'm the oldest of 7 kids from a middle-class working family. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. That's where I come from. I started my career as a garbage man, for God's sake. I worked all these manual labor jobs. So I can relate to that in a way that the incumbent senator, in my opinion, can't.
Only got a minute. Are you hearing a lot about the primary? Representative Nardolillo is your opponent. He was in first. I got a kick out of it after you announced. He suggested that maybe you want to get out of the race for him because he's got the mojo. Interesting cat. Do you run into him out there?
Yeah, sure. I run into him occasionally, and we've been very cordial with one another. He's been banging me on social media and the like. But I think when you compare experience, education, and electability, and fundraising, frankly, he just raised $9,000 the last quarter, and I raised over 200 and got 400 in the bank. He's not going to be. Look, he's got a bright future someday, but he's basically served only 3 terms in the legislature, 2 terms and 3 years, so it's not his time.
All right, listen, come back early and often. When you've got something to say it. Don't be a stranger.
Okay.
All right, Bob Flanders running for U.S. Senate. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. We will continue to follow these races, this way, that way. The races are getting a little bit more, focused. Remember, there's still a June deadline where anything can happen, and I'm still thinking we might have a provocative entry into a statewide race here. So I'm going to tell you about that tomorrow. 3 o'clock on the radio as well. See you then. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.